for the film, and thanks so much for coming here today. Actually, yeah. One of the things we thought of while Shalini and myself were discussing this, bringing kind of my archives and my work into the studio, was the fact that any kind of research or work constantly collaborates either in person or in ways of references with a lot of other scholars, a lot of other practitioners, a lot of other work. So when one was kind of thinking of setting up an archive and a studio in the gallery space, it was also very important to have certain conversations with scholars, practitioners, colleagues, friends that either one has worked earlier with or one has encountered through their work. And to kind of bring Dobigard to this context, one was the clear visual references that I found when I obviously saw the film, because in a sense Bhuleshwar and Muhammad Ali Road are two neighbours, and I moved into Muhammad Ali Road only towards the end of my work, and still it's a completely different world, and I kind of nearly finished my research by that time. So the area where Amir Khan stays was probably one of the last walks that I did in the area, and the fountain is a very central reference point in that, which you just see the piao in one of the shots. No, I know this time. So that was one clear reference, which was interesting and exciting, but also amongst the many other Bombay films that one has seen, one has encountered, there was a certain connect that I made with this film immediately for various reasons, which I hope to bring up in the course of this discussion. But one of the very central things was the nature of seeing, and the whole question of studying the city has been so obsessive. It has been on there for a long time, and people have written and studied the city, but it has reached a certain obsessive, even obnoxious level in the last, one can say, 10 to 15 years. The kind of also the level of making everything into an archive. And then it was important to kind of step back and see what it means to see the city, study the city, archive the city. And somewhere I felt that the film does deal with this question very, very clearly. For example, the seeing of the city happens in a couple of very interesting ways. For example, the seeing of the city outside your window and what that means, the landscape outside. Or the seeing of the city which peeps into a house. And that kind of relates very often to something that I've said, that when we talk about the city, we actually don't realize that we have never seen interior spaces of city. We have never seen homes. We imagine that every other home is like my home, my friend's home, or my cousin's homes. But we've not seen the home, for example. So when we talk of the labyrinth of the city, do we really understand or realize what that labyrinth means? What it is to poke and peep into somebody's house. So the looking through the window, or the looking through the obsessive new age researcher's camera, where she wants to kind of obsessively photograph and record a certain passing phase. Or the seeing through the video, through the home video of this person who's kind of dealing with herself, her space in the new city, whether it's Elephanta, whether it's a birthday cake. So constructing the scene was I think that was something very, very interestingly put together, which also becomes the narrative in a sense, the way the film gets constructed. So if you could comment on this to begin.
Yeah, actually, when I set out to write it, I wanted to do just that. When we were talking about the interiors of the city. Really, I wanted to look at how the city is actually a construct of so many people's experiences of it, and isn't really just the exterior architecture, but really your own personal experience, your own sort of apperceptive background that you bring to the city, the way that you look at the people around you, the different faces of the city that I tried to get through these four characters. Right. So, at the very outset, I wanted to make it not a very single narrative sort of film, because it wasn't really about plot, but it was much more about, these lives that crisscross, and the way these people sort of see the city, see the lives around them, interact and change as they go along. And to do that, I sort of not just shot the film, in different formats, so that it would visually and texturally be a different way of seeing for the audience, but also wanted to kind of give the characters their own lens on the city, their own window, to sort of present their way of seeing the city in a particular way. So Arun has, uses the city as his muse and, paints mostly things to do with the city. Yasmin has a home video camera, and through her you actually see the city as someone who possibly has never seen such a tall building before, or has never seen the sea, and is the kind of person who would ordinarily, whose point of view would never be put forward, would be the kind of person whose voice you never hear in the mainstream. I mean, a small town Muslim woman whose husband is away all the time. You actually realize has a much more poetic way of looking at the same city that we've sort of gotten cynical about. And Shai, who as an NRI, who's a girl who probably lived here in the past, comes back to sort of rediscover the city, but with again a lens which is of someone who's probably privileged. So taking portraits of people on the street who would otherwise maybe not have black and white portraits of themselves made, is her way of sort of engaging with the city that she doesn't know. So the ways of seeing, the ways they see the city also tell you a lot about the way they see themselves and how they situate themselves, because each of them I wanted in some way to be an outsider in their own worlds. They don't quite fit in, they're not very happy where they are. Either they're an immigrant who can't fit in, or there's someone with aspirations like Munna who want to be someone else, or it's Shai who wants to sort of put aside this sort of privileged background and get into the real city, and Arun who just doesn't fit in general. He's just an island, and kind of a little bit like Bombay himself. So the ways of seeing was a very important part for me, because it was through these four people's experiences and vision that I wanted to construct the idea of Bombay, of what Bombay means to me.
So also what happens in the process, in the kind of the different frames and the different, what also happens is that Arun rediscovers the sea for himself after the home video. So in a sense it's also this kind of or kind of using the construction site to kind of look into the private life rather than getting into the construction workers' photographs. So in a sense, also what happens, which is the other kind of motive that I want to get to, is the question of collecting. And in a sense, kind of there's this and there's that. There's this person and there's this neighbor. There's this sense of kind of looking at one landscape against the other. There's this sense of the material of the window, or the birthday cake, or the dining table, or the broken fan. So there is a range of these images which kind of build up. But interestingly, except for the NRI researchers who kind of thinks it's a complete study, at least for the sake of the research paper, the rest of them stay incomplete. And which is in a sense so true, that the obsessive kind of collecting, or the whole trope of collecting to accumulate an idea, is so much that everybody has struggled with as far as one tries to understand. And when the collection is complete, or when it is going to fall apart, is never clearly sure. And what also you do is you collect a lot of neighbourhoods and areas for us, which, and I don't speak this nostalgically, but it's just in a sense of very important reminding of that there is Nagpada, of there is this Bhat Gali that is kind of, or there is still a sense of the street which becomes an eating street at a season, at a festival. So in a sense it's about memories not as nostalgia, but also memories as essential remembrances. And that's something that happens also.
I think I'm a full victim of this collecting syndrome, because for me, I kind of feel a bit like film is a way that it sort of is an archive for me of not just the life that I lived while I was making the film, but all the sort of, for me, the rediscovering parts of Bombay that I hadn't been to in years, going to new gullies that I had never been to, and that sort of archaeology. You sort of start off with a script, but getting into the city and for instance that Piao place which I finally found Ferdinand's house wasn't in the script. But I was so sure that that area would sort of come up with something that I wanted to, would want to use. I sent my line producer, even though in the script it was a tall building with, regular, in that area, the landscape is changing so rapidly that I tried to later do it through the building that's coming up next to his house, which is complete post-production. There is we had to mat it in later. But that is a reality in that area. All these chawls are coming down. And for me, that strong sense that I wanted to preserve that vision, that sort of space in Bombay, which is so fast disappearing, which is giving rise to buildings that in some way leave us almost without an identity. They're kind of very generic, concrete, and have no connect really with a way of life or a culture, which those parts of Bombay so clearly were. But I wanted to preserve it somehow. It was really the idea that let me collect it and put it on my film, so that 10 years, 20 years later, when I see it, and the funny thing is that very balcony which Amir stands in, and that house which Yasmin lives in, changed literally 2 months after we finished shooting. That balcony was broken, and the balcony because it was such an old building that we were told, look, shoot at your own risk. So we didn't take a crane up, So it's changing really fast, and I think that idea of the city and how in some ways it's a romanticized idea, because I don't have to live in a chawl, so it's a wonderful thing to look at these beautiful tile-roofed buildings with their lovely rounded fronts and their little balconies, and want to preserve them. And that need was there in the film. I could have shot in, much more sort of high-rise suburb or Lokhandwala or somewhere which equally talks about another kind of Bombay and another sort of person. But it was this need to sort of.
No, it's nice just because I'm an architect, everybody thinks if I talk of an old building, I'm talking about either architecture history or conservation, and that's like the label you are put into. But it was the same thing that I don't know if I can conserve these buildings. I don't know if they should be. I don't know how can you force people to live in a place that sometimes is crammy and you wouldn't want to live yourself. But at the same time, there was also this thing that nothing needs to change just for the sake of change. There were all these kind of questions and anxieties that you personally have. Although for me, I have to say that having lived in Parsi colonies and visiting kind of either families or doctors in some of these trust chawls, or visiting Kalwa Devi where your dad worked, and he's like going to have Piyush there, or all roadside food is bad except Kalwa Devi. So one has lived through these kind of stories also. But still, it was as you said, not nostalgia, but there was a certain eagerness as well as anxiety to kind of collect it and say that at least there is a certain kind of a narrative or a story that is put forth in the way some of this material comes together, the way kind of that also happens in your film, including the most beautiful thing of continuously trying to look into the neighbor's window and trying to construct life that is behind that wall, just between these two windows, which I think was a really beautiful motive. But it also brings to this other thing, the way you were talking, and I would say that if one would say that I would love your Muhammad Ali Road or I would love my Bhuleshwar, not in a sense of being obsessive again or nostalgic about that space, but it also gives one a certain structure or a way of looking at much broader things, which is either the city in general or the sense of these relationships, okay, what it means for a guy who's just run away from Bihar, has set up a certain kind of life, to be invited for chai by a kind of person from a space and a culture that you would not easily identify with, but you encounter it every day. So it's also this kind of a city that one associates with relationships of a particular kind, which is why the movie Slumdog Millionaire, which for various reasons I didn't see beyond the first 10 or 15 minutes, one of the clear motives why it's not a Bombay film is because of the way the kind of the chaiwala is treated in that film. That the relationships that people set up. And Bombay has a specific way that that you may not be very kind of comfortable with people that come from different social classes, economic classes, but you set up certain equations and relationships, whether it's your workspace and home space. And that's another thing that happens in the movie very strongly, these sets of relationships, including a neighbor that stares blankly, but has a very strong presence in whether Amir Khan is emotionally bursting out, or somebody's trying to leave a courier packet with a neighbor or a packet with a neighbor. So there was also this interesting set of relationships, and the other relationship of the photograph, that you are a character in a researcher's photograph. So these various sets of characters and their relationships is something that was also very striking about the film.
I've lived in 2 other cities. I lived in Calcutta. I lived there for 18 years, and then in Delhi briefly for college. And somehow there's something about Bombay and the way, I wouldn't say that you wouldn't have these relationships elsewhere, that you would. And I think something that's always interested me is the way classes sort of work, the whole idea of class works in India, and how it's such a taken for granted everyday thing where your neighbor won't be invited to sit at the table with you. And these are things that have always interested me and bothered me to a large extent. But I find somehow in Bombay the idea of identity, possibly the reason being, that historically it was a port and this, great trading hub, and scores of boats came and people came and cultures, sort of washed up on its shores over time. And you have a place that sort of, in many ways, was cosmopolitan for a very long time, and hence the idea that you can be who you want to be in this city was something that struck me when I came to the city for the very first time, and that's the reason I wanted to make a film on this city, because I feel that that's something very worth preserving, and I still look at the city with a lot of hope in that respect, that it is a city where you can look to change identities. Munna can actually dream of being an extra in a movie, maybe become a small actor, maybe become a star. It's a bit of a cliche, but I feel that relationships here are different, because there are no sort of gated communities. You can't hide behind these big walls and just go in your tinted BMWs and not participate with life on the street. I mean, everybody takes the train. There's enough of an interaction between different kinds of people, and even though communities, each suburb has its flavor, has its language, has the different kinds of food, it still is a city where you kind of it's very democratic. It's very sort of in your face. You can't get away from it, and that I think makes for different relationships. I mean, you can, and that's why I wanted to test this relationship also of this Dhobi and this girl. I mean, what actually would happen if 2 people from very different backgrounds became friends? Would it go further than that? So I think that interests me a lot about Bombay. I think there's a lot to be said about how the city has, over time, been a refuge for people of all kinds. Has certainly become home to the widest range of people in this country, I feel. And you feel it like it's home. You're not just an immigrant after a while. That's what's interesting about Bombay.
Yeah, the home thing is something we can pick up, but it also reminds me of Mirza, the character from Rohinton Mysteries' Family Matters, who at one point gets pulled in the train and is happy. I mean, I think goes on for 2 pages saying how beautiful and wonderful the city is, and the next time he's falling off the train and nobody holds him, and he starts cursing. He's saying, where are all those beautiful stranger friends that have disappeared? So it's also this kind of love and hate that constantly unfolds. But this is also something, I think, in a certain way relates to the question of home. That how do people really see the city as the space of the home? Because a lot of us do say we live in Bombay, but still there are loads of people who have the sense of a native place, where you go for a vacation to a native town, or you go for a wedding or a Diwali to your native place, or this Thomas Blom Hansen kind of talks about, and essentially which one saw during the 90 to 93 riots also, kind of a lot of people kind of moving out of the city again, in a certain sense under various kind of circumstances. So there is always this kind of relationship that when do you make the city a complete home, or do you ever make the city a complete home? The chawls, I think, as a structure, as a space, have been kind of witness to this, as to how they've worked with kind of migrants, families settling, moving out, etc. Or also the way kind of the Munna's house that you see, and that kind of a geography as to what does that house mean as compared to any other an Arun house or a Shai house. So it's the materiality of the house that I think makes the city's fabric quite complex. It's not just the architectural facades or the streets or whatever, but also conceptually how do we relate to the question of home in the city? How settled are we in that sense?
That's an interesting question, because I keep posing it to myself, because I do consider Bombay very much home. But I keep thinking, will I be able to live here forever? Will I be able to live here into my old age, and will I want to live here? And I'm a properly homeless in that sense person. I don't have a native place. This is my home. I grew up. My parents are from the south. I grew up in Calcutta, studied here and in Delhi. And Bombay sort of became my home the second I arrived. I knew that I wanted to live here and make it my home. But that's an interesting question. I mean, I think cities are sort of places that attract people for their jobs, for opportunity, and for many other things that possibly your traditional cultural space wouldn't offer you. And so how much the city can be home is something that I'll always wonder. The stress, the high intensity of life in any city. I don't think there's any big city that doesn't make big demands on people who live in it. Any city kind of stops being such a great place to live once you've sort of finished your working life, and so the notion of going back to your native place, keeping ties going, is something that I think most people have. They want to go back and have a quiet, retired life in their real home, or to visit their family. Which is why I kind of Munna was interesting for me, because he clearly came to Bombay for opportunity and to leave behind a life of hunger and poverty, and once he comes here, he's asked, do you go back to visit? And he's like, no, I don't really miss them. I don't. And for me, he is really Bombay. He's the person who the city just sucks up, and he becomes the city. This is, for me, he was always the kind of person who will live here, who will never probably go back to Bihar or go back to another life, because this became his life. The city became his life. For me, becomes the city. So the idea of home is one question that I keep asking.
But also, what does that become? Because also
within the city, you're constantly changing homes. That's the other
thing I was coming to, because there's a strong set. One is it comes as a narrative thing, the lease home, unending lease, yahan pe raho, wahan pe raho. But then also the materiality which you focused quite strongly, the living out of boxes, the kind of, I think the last home that it nearly looks like one of these new apartments outside Badala, where you see that kind of barren, but partly, But also there is that very beautiful kind of a little bit nostalgic stained glass window in the Arun house, or the kind of balcony looking out at the sea in the old Parsi house. And the kind of the new apartment house also looking out, but that bedroom structure is very different from Shai's bedroom structure. So there's also this kind of sensitivity of various levels of the old money, the new money, the kind of the leaking chapra, outside there's a guy sleeping in the tent kind of a thing. So there's a lot to the materiality of home and the way that landscape changes in various parts of the city.
The city for me is just such a is constantly being built, and that means that you'll never actually be able to set down roots in quite the same way you could in your village. You know, there's for instance, Munna's last when he leaves and moves again, when he leaves the slum by the railway tracks. Actually, the place I wanted to shoot was this just visually incredible place in Goregaon, which is a slum redevelopment project, which is just, it looks like outer space. I mean, it's just these enormous buildings with rabbit wadded little homes, and people are all expected, you know, of course it's much better for them in the sense they have water, they have a bathroom. So it's better than the slum for sure. But the way they sort of expected to live in this new sort of, I did shoot it, the place that his taxi finally goes into is another slum redevelopment project. And that for me was a way of saying, okay, look, now that even the slums will change, they'll become redevelopment projects. The redevelopment projects will be bought up by builders and become buildings. And you know, the cycle goes on, and the city is constantly, you know, being built layer by layer. And I wanted that to be a motif that runs through the film. In fact, I had another character in the film. I don't know if you saw any of the special features on that DVD, but there was a character who I wrote in just for this, the idea of this, that you know, the city is home, but the home is being built by this migrant labourer from Andhra, who will never have a home in the city. So he's constantly building these apartments which, you know, families will move into and possibly sell and move to bigger apartments, and new families will move into or lease them out, and you know. But he, so you see him a little bit in the credits, in the front credits, in the opening credits. So he was a character called Selva, whom I had actually written into the whole film, and his life came in sort of vignettes through the film, and very sort of silent punctuations, where you sort of see Selva go through his working day, get a postcard from home, and you know, sort of finally at the end of the film, actually the end of the film was different, and the end of the film was Selva getting onto a bus, and as he gets onto a bus, you sort of come to the end of the back of the bus, and another construction worker is getting his bag off the bus and coming into the city. So you know, that constant flow of new blood to the city from other places, you know. So that Selva's life for me was a way of showing how this city is being built by hands that of course never get a place in the city themselves. But also the fact that, you know, there is no time and no space for pause. It's constantly in motion, and there's always you know, change around us.
And that comes out in a certain eerie way in the house that Arun moves into. To which also happens if you are kind of looking out for any kind of rental or lease housing. You have this imagination that who was here before, and how clean was the house, and what happened in this corner, who lived in this house, and these kind of issues, and it's kind of sort of he enters into an empty landscape, but it's not empty. And at the same time, it's real life. It's not just one kind of home video that will go into the city's multiple archives for some fancy, but it's some kind of real life that was lived through cooking and looking out and husband and all of that, and he's moved into that house. So the space is much richer than this character who's kind of entered the.
That fascinates me, because I lived on rent or you know, up until I got married, and changed about 10 houses in 5 years. And I always thought, you know, because there's always some detritus left behind, you know, there'll be a comb, there'll be the cover of some book, and you sort of wonder who are these people who lived here before me, you know, and the home is kind of warm with the energy of some other lives, some other narratives, some other, you know, personal histories. And I wanted to kind of, so, you know, actually make that into something physical, you know, someone who actually leaves her life behind, and he lives and rediscovers the city through her life, you know. So that really interests me about the city as well. And the idea of Arun moving that many times was literally a personal experience. I didn't find the box and tapes, but something like that.
Just shifting, another thing is, which was quite interesting, is these kind of broad landscapes of the city. At one level it happens, because I also related that very early when as students we had started studying some of the city parts. I remember precisely in this Cavill area going to some buildings where we were not stopped because we were students. And when you went to the terrace, you just realize that there's a landscape of the city at the terrace level. And I remember having that imagination at that time, saying that Bombay is not really a high-rise city.
Absolutely.
Because in the right in the middle of this Bhuleshwar, where actually the sea is not very far, you can see the sea sometimes on both the sides. The east and the west, you can see the sea. And obviously that is kind of changing now. In a certain way, and that was very interesting, because this Arun looks out of the window and he sees this kind of landscape, but also that landscape sometimes the scale that jumps, from that kind of a landscape to the gully of a rat killer, or some of the very interesting end shots which are very close to where I stay, like Nana Chowk and Tardev. Why did you shoot in Nana Chowk and Tardev? Because they're really rich areas in terms of their texture. They are also in between this kind of the Bhuleshwar Kalbadevi Grant Road area and the Haji Ali Pedder Road area. So there is a certain sense to that area.
Nana Chowk was, I wanted that run to sort of be close enough to, I mean, not a lot of people would immediately associate with Nana Chowk, so I wanted it to be in architectural terms closer, as close to Dhobi Ghat as possible. To look like they could have come out of Dhobi Ghat and run down that way. And also just because it's just so spectacular. I mean, 5 or 6 roads meet in this, crazy circle. And
the sweep of Nesbagh.
And the sweep of Nesbagh. And when you run, you sort of behind him is this huge Shiv Sena hoarding, and as he walks away, there's an M&S hoarding, and there you have the old Bombay, which was a different kind of inclusive city. So you kind of feel that so many energies of the city, and you see this traffic, and I wanted it to be that as he ran, from under that bridge, the Lavington Bridge, the bridge that goes to Lavington, there's that amazing building, the one that goes along towards Grant Road, the Grant Road building corner. So I wanted to see that building. It's one another thing. So my poor DOP, my cinematographer had great trouble, because I was like, I want the building in the background, and he was trying to not be killed at being killed. But the sheer drama of that chalk was what I wanted for the end. It had to be something grand. But in terms of landscape, that whole part of, I chose to shoot Island Bombay, the old part of Bombay, because you kind of see that landscape changing so much more clearly there than anywhere else. And you're so right. I kind of wanted some great sort of skyline shots of Bombay, imagining that our city is such a sort of grand skyline-worthy city. But actually, when I went to various angles, I just found that our city actually is mostly 4- and 5-story buildings. It's just small bits of the city that are high-rises. Of course, that's going to change, and that's also something I was interested to capture. So, when you see the opening credits, the place we shot in, the construction workers smoking a beedi at the very top of the building, and we shot that in Gaiwadi, in one very tall building that's coming up where there was a chawl, and it's literally a 20-story building in the middle of chawl land, which is all 2-story. So literally you can see as far as I mean, if you actually pause that shot, you can see everything in every direction. You can see for miles, and as you see further, you can see Pedder Road, and it looks like big giant buildings sort of stomping their way into tile roof country. So it's I wanted to get that moment where you sort of there is a point at which you can actually see both sides of the sea from one big tall building. I don't know how long that will last, and just the idea that these buildings are completely when you look at the city from, say, Arun's balcony, that's a landscape that may not exist beyond a couple of years, I think.
Just like while you were talking, I was thinking of Grand Road, and actually it's true. The Grand Road station, Nana Chowk, is quite a transition area, because at one line you go to Kemp's Corner and Pedder Road, and if you are just on the other side of the station, which is the classic east-west divide that you have in some of these parts, you can move into the Grand Road and the Pilaus and the early theatre and Lamington Road and all of that. And even Tardeo has that tendency of also these ranges of like the Gujarati, the Gujarati and the Parsi Gujarati and the Maharashtrians and these kind of groups which, you know, they are not demarcated in a strong sense, but they all yet exist in a certain way.
Absolutely.
But you know them. You don't kind of see it very violently in the landscape. That's something that is there. So these are kind of very interesting junctions.
In fact, some of the pictures that you have out there are exactly the kind of images that I captured when I set out to make the film. You know, I sort of went to the very same, literally the very same chalks, and the same sort of, for instance, this second picture from the left, the same sort of feeling that kind of style of construction, that kind of way of life is just being wiped out, was something that I was very conscious of including. I had a scene where the first picture you had of that very tall building, I had a scene like which is cut out, and I think it's in the extra deleted scenes on the DVD. But where Yasmin is sort of struck by how people could live in such tall buildings with these millions of windows, and how they don't feel scared that they're up on the 20th floor and they have glass windows. And so just the idea of these two completely different ways of life was something I wanted to do.
No, I love the window motif, because there's the other picture of the man looking outside the window, this very kind of a just retired person, and you can't see his interiors, and that's a window image that I've very often started my conversation or presentations with. The sense of being at this window which looks out on the street which you can't see, and an interior which is dark, but it's basically the look that becomes quite
I think all of us as filmmakers especially are such voyeurs, and I really got to do that in this film, because I especially am the kind who will sort of drive my car really slow on the JJ flyover, because just the buildings you pass are just so spectacular that you actually get a chance to look in. So that's something I felt had to be part of the film, because you can't live in a city and not be curious about your neighbors, and not actually have access, which you would say, in a chawl, like we were talking about earlier. You kind of, it's a less private life, but Arun sort of being obsessively interested in someone's private life, even if it's on a tape.
Correct, absolutely.
That kind of thing was, I think, something maybe that...
No, that's very important even as a practitioner or as a researcher. Like sometimes telling my students that, you just can't enter somebody's house to measure draw it. It's somebody's house at the end of the day, but it's also where the city exists and lives in a certain way. So how do you kind of deal with it? Like, I also worked with this 1930s author Saroj Pathak, who I discovered just by chance because I was narrating a story that I got in an oral history workshop, and this person who teaches at the Baroda school came and said, "Have you read Saroj Pathak?" So I said, "No." And she said, "But she talks about what this woman in your oral history workshop spoke about." So it's this sense of the interior kind of coming down on you, because you are a woman in the Bhatia community who doesn't want to do the regular marry in the 20s, has grown up without a father, so is a little more outspoken. So she describes the chawl as a crumbling building, but in the way she describes the creaking door and the leaking sewage pipe, you clearly see a disgust for that kind of space also. So that was kind of interesting, that what it meant as a building in her short stories. You get this kind of in the short story writing. So this is this crazy thing that you have to do with what it means to engage with lives and spaces that are used by people. Should we open for questions from the audience?
How long did it take you to complete the film?
Long enough for me to think twice about making another one, but I sort of wrote the film in 2005. got involved with making 2 other films in our production house, and then I sort of got around to shooting it in 2008. From shoot to release was almost two and a half years, almost 3 years, but started in May and released in January of last year. But yeah, 2.5 years is what it took to. We shot it fairly quickly in the space of a few months. I mean, not every day, but in the space of a few months. And after, I took a long time to edit it. It took about a year to edit it, and which is I think by most film standards fairly long. And then we sort of wanted to take it to a couple of festivals. So we premiered at Toronto, we went to London. And then planned our marketing. So 2.5 years is what it took me from start of shooting. Yeah.
That last shot, when he's running, how difficult must that have been?
That was very hard, actually. Yeah. We had to figure out how to do it. One, of course, without getting Pratik killed. And it was just a very real possibility, and so he just couldn't stop running. If he stopped running, forget about it. But of course we had to ensure that could never happen. So planning it was quite hard. I did want that drama that there's so much traffic that he could actually be run over at any time, and I wanted a particular kind of
traffic choreographed.
A lot of it was. What we did was we used to rehearse at night. We went quite a few times with my action directors, and we sort of timed it, figured out how to shoot it, because we needed to shoot it. We needed to, like I said, I wanted certain buildings in the background. I wanted a lot of things, and I wanted the idea of this crisscross of traffic. So I didn't want it to be just one column of traffic. So we had to time the traffic lights so that the traffic from Tardeo would join this stream, so that we would leave when the lights were red with 15 seconds to go, so that by the time we joined here, the buses and things could come from the back. So it was a lot of rehearsal and choreography. The cars you see immediately around him are all ours, so he couldn't have gotten killed. But there's the possibility that people can. So they had to be really sure that nobody could actually come between them. And of course, we had the Steadicam on a bike, we had the focus puller on another bike, remote pulling focus, because you need to pull focus on him when he's changing. So they had to maintain a certain distance, which sometimes is not in your hands. Sometimes you come much closer because someone ahead behind you is, you're filming this way and someone ahead of you has stopped, or there's a traffic jam on that end. So and actually it's quite a long run. So Pratik would collapse. He would be so tired, bichara, after running. And doing 3 takes, he'd just be like, okay.
So it was when she puts the window down and he just gives her that bit of paper and there's no conversation.
He can't say
anything.
anything.
Talk.
Yeah.
That was
Actually, if you look at if you watch it without the cuts, he puts his hand on the window and then I say cut and he collapses. I mean, people have to go and quickly get a chair because he's so tired. But we had to, of course, by the time we reset and we went under the bridge and got everything, it was usually, we had to shoot it to look like evening light. So we would shoot shot it on, I think, 2 days, once in the morning, once in the evening, once in the morning, once in the evening. So we had four goes at it. Of course, 2 or 3 takes each time of day. So early morning sometimes can look like evening. So yeah, it was tricky because we wanted a lot of traffic and it was tricky. It was quite hard.
Ma'am, according to you, how does this Dhobi Ghat connect with different lives?
Connect with different lives. Well, actually, for me, Dhobi Ghat was a bit of a metaphor for the city itself, and how the city is a place where all kinds of people come together and in many ways just it's a very level playing ground up beyond the point, and that for me was the idea of Dhobi Ghat, because so many kinds of homes send their clothes to the very same water to be washed. And they all come out clean, they all come out ironed, and you don't know which house is rich, which house is Gujarati, and So that was, the title was more a metaphor. It just so happened, and I wrote the title literally before I wrote the film. I knew that I wanted this title to be representative in some way of what I was trying to say through the film. Of course, I knew that the idea of a dhobi and how he somehow has access to houses of different kinds, is privy to people's personal lives, because you see a stain on a person's shirt and you wonder what this person's life is like, or what she has been up to, and you kind of are in some sort of way connecting so many different households by just your going to so many different places. So in this film, of course, he directly connects Shai and Arun. So that was another good reason to have the title as Dhobigat. But basically the title was more metaphorical.
I also related to it. Sorry, yes. It's also a very cliched tourist place.
Yeah, it is.
So earlier when it spread around that I do walks of Bhuleshwar for friends or artists, architects visiting the city, and then you also have sometimes these tourists saying that, but will you take us to Dhobigat? And I'm like, no. So then you go somewhere else.
Yeah.
So it's also this kind of the place to go which becomes an object, but precisely as you said in the movie, it unfolds in a very different way. It has a reality.
It does.
Rather than a metaphor.
To me also
object.
it's such an interesting, it has a very interesting history, because apparently, I forget now, it used to be elsewhere, and how it was actually, Sharda was telling me about the original Dhobigat and how it was moved here. Also the idea that these are all, again, it's spread over like a good acre of land, and all the people working here are mostly migrants. These stones are owned by, like one man might have 50 stones and they're rented to these dhobis. So, apart from the fact that it's just spectacular to see, that whipping of these clothes on the stone is just such a sight. I had to include it somehow. Yeah, it's such a tourist,
We even had postcards of Dhobi outside.
Ma'am, what I want to ask is, how difficult is it to sort of imagine, like in your film, when you show 4 different perspectives, because when even when you just walk on the street, you see different people and you're thinking, what is his perspective of the city? And there's always this, worry or anxiety of you putting your bias into his perspective in the way you're interpreting it. So, how tough was it to really, have these 4 completely, for themselves perspectives?
Yeah, well, when I was writing it, it was for me, a real exploration of a kind, because I'm none of these people. Maybe to some extent shy, but not really. So, kind of making it authentic, making their voices sound and be real. For instance, I've never been to UP, so I don't know what a small town UP woman would be like. But it was that leap of imagination. It was sort of many years of observation that I kind of created people like Munna and Yasmin and Arun and Shai. I might know an Arun and a Shai, but so it was difficult initially, and I have to say it was again a script that I wrote without research. It wasn't like I hadn't actually been to the Dhobigat when I wrote the film. I again had just seen images of it, and I imagined what a Dhobi's life would be like, simply. So of course, after I wrote it, I had to go back and make sure that it wasn't completely off the mark. But most of us, I think, in this country are so used to, having a relationship with all kinds of cultures and types.
This limitedness or the completeness or fullness of imagination, experience, reality is in a sense a part of most of this kind of work or what we engage with in an everyday life. That how much of reality do we engage with in a so-called complete way? Does it become complete? How much of it do we live by imagination? It's like somebody asking me in that 123 bus route which goes by the sea, samandar aisa hota hai? That kind of a thing. But you can never forget that kind of a question that has come to you. And once you're moving and working in the city, and if you're a bit more conscious, you do encounter this
Absolutely.
in a daily way, not because you're searching for it, but because
Yeah.
you're working and living
Yeah.
in the city. So there is some aspect to a certain sense of discovering, a certain
Yeah.
sense of knowing, and then extending it in some way. Obviously, you do it in a responsible way.
As well,
Yeah, you do it in a responsible way because there are other people, characters, lives that you're talking about or working with.
I mean, ultimately, luckily, you can take the liberties of fiction, but I mean, I wanted it essentially to be a film that rang very true.
Right.
That I wanted it to be lives that you could be passing by on a street and you could meet on a street somewhere.
Yeah.
So that I did need to work very hard at that. Because especially when you're writing dialogue, you see, when you're just visualizing, you can still do it. But when you're actually giving people a voice, for instance, the girl from Alihabad, how she would speak, and I wrote it all myself. So Urdu is something that I'm not. I speak fairly soft Hindi, but I'm not a great Urdu speaking person. But I sort of had to extend myself into these lives and experiences and create them so that they felt like, yes, this could be. And that, I think, partly is the excitement of fiction.
In fact, I was a little curious because since you set it in Dhobi, but now that you say it's a metaphor, weren't there any characters over there who could have featured in the film apart from Pratik? Because I asked this for one reason. In 2004, I was shooting around on the streets of Mumbai and happened to visit Dhobi. And it was a time when people had taken break from washing clothes and they were kind of resting under the canopies and whatever they could over. So I just got talking with one of the guys and he said he's been here for quite a long time and his forefathers also were the same profession at the very place. So the geographical area as a contained space, is something which kind of still time. And he brought out books of poetry from the time of freedom struggle, from the 30s, 40s and all that kind of a thing. And I whiled away the time when he actually sang those songs and everything. So 2004, freedom fighting, freedom fighters and all those poems, something which I never expected. So the kind of characters you come across.
It's true. I tried initially to do that. I mean, while I was casting for this character I'd written, I wanted each of them to be immigrants in some way to the city themselves. All 4 characters, I wanted them to be island characters. So I didn't want someone who was traditionally born into a Dhobi caste and was part of that community from the beginning. So, but I did go to the Dhobi Ghat to all the Dhobi Ghats. We tested in Dhobi Ghats as far as Borivali and places, to try and get a face of, because I was casting non-actors in any case. So Yasmin is a non-actor, Shai is a non-actor, even Pratik, this is his first real film. So I wanted non-actors and that was one of the ideas I started with, and I did cast. In fact, we have casting tapes from all the Dhobi Ghats in Banganga. We found one guy from Banganga who was, a good-looking chap who could be the kind who want to be in films. But you also need to be able to carry off a part which is central and in some way be able to carry off dialogue. And so it didn't work out. But that was one of the things I did think about. Casting real people was very much on my mind.
A lot of other questions of research and would come into that. If when you're dealing with a person who's really a Dhobi versus a character, what are you dealing with?
Absolutely.
What are your relationships? I think that would be very important.
Very important.
Now, when you were writing, what made you choose these 4 characters? You said you wanted us to sort of experience people that you would come across on a regular basis. Well, basically, I can say I belong to upper middle class. I never saw any character that I could very upfront relate with. I mean, I do travel by trains on a daily basis while going to college. I could never, on a very personal basis, I thought it was very cliche. I mean, I do love the movie, but I thought it was very cliche because I could really see a really lower class crowd, as in characters, and a very upper class based character. What made you pick these 4?
Well, for me, Arun is fairly upper middle class. I wouldn't put him in a wealthy category. He could be me. He's exactly the kind of person, he just happens to be an introvert, but the kind of life that he comes from is quite easily mine. So I did want to cover the middle class in some way, but really the intention wasn't to give everybody a wide spectrum of everything that exists in the city. I chose these because these lives and stories interested me and logically lent themselves to the narrative. So it's not a documentary. I didn't intend to kind of give you one slice of each class that exists. That would be very difficult for any filmmaker to do. But these were stories that I wanted because I felt they in some way personified aspects of the city.
The characters extend, I think, to a variety of other objects and motifs in the film. And I think those are much interesting for me because the person is made up of the place he stays in, the cooking that anda and having it with a toast, and those kind of details are very important in the way the character extends it. So that is what became interesting for me to see, rather than just the person as a character.
And I don't feel, especially our country being as complex as it is, it's very easy to say upper middle class. But what is upper middle class? What is middle class anymore? So Yasmin, to my mind, actually is someone who belongs maybe to the middle class, but whose husband is wealthy enough to buy her a handicap, and obviously does whatever business and is able to buy her that. They live in their own apartment. They don't live in a slum, so they are middle class. But there is, these tags in India are very difficult. It's actually just personal life, personal experiences, and like you said, each person's home tells you a different story. Absolutely, it's completely. The home, that very same space that Yasmin lived in becomes something totally different when Anu lives in it. And they happen to be people, class is one aspect of their lives, but they just have the access, the opportunity, the imagination, the way they live their lives and relate to the city around them is a totally different thing.
The simple fact that Chai can go to a construction building and shoot into somebody's house. Today it's a crazy way where even if you're just walking on the street, you're stopped 5 times before you can take a picture. I think these are interesting things to think about, what it means to be able to have that access also.
How often does the Toby have access to bedroom?
Good question. I don't know, but I don't think it's not possible that a Toby has an affair with a bored housewife. So I think I don't know how often it happens. I haven't done that much research.
The interesting thing is that I was just talking about this with a friend, and I said also it's that, if I'm correct, you leave it ambiguous in the movie.
I do, but I intended very much.
Yeah, but it's precisely the question that how much of the city do you know and do you not know?
But there's a power equation there that I wanted to talk about very clearly. Sorry?
Yeah, the lady was showing suggestion on that.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a sort of power thing going on there, where certainly there were sexual favors. Definitely, there was some sort of sexual history that they've had, and he's an attractive guy, and she possibly doesn't have a husband or just doesn't like him very much. And I kind of imagine that he doesn't do this for money, but for whatever, a cell phone or some favors, or just the idea that you kind of actually have access to this kind of.
Men bachelors don't employ living maids. Again, there's lots of this innuendo.
No, but it's also real life.
That sort of relationship interested me, where she's fine with sleeping with him, but then remember your place.
Absolutely.
The second that he wants to sort of end this relationship, she wants to show him the door and show him her power. So that relationship between classes I wanted to sort of look at. It to my mind is something that we don't look at. We've seen films like Bhuvan Shom and things like that, where landlord is making advances on worker's wife, and it's demanded as part and parcel of his status. So it was in some ways trying to do that relationship.
Just straight question. How many times would you have seen the film yourself? And would you see it, when you see it probably 20, 30 times, do you feel that you would have to make some changes in the film or something that bothers you or something that you want to...
No, so I've seen it like, 20, 30 is just the first week possibly. I've seen it at least, I would say upward of 500 times. The whole film, I would have seen, okay, the whole film, maybe not all my footage I would have, but my whole film I would have seen upward of 100 times easily. And yes, of course, there are lots of things that I would change, but that was me then, and you kind of, every time